run as part of the Centre for Financial Inclusion's Financial Inclusion Week. This webinar today is being organised by Move 78 and Financial Resilience Australia. So I'd like to thank firstly the CFI for the opportunity to have us today, and also thank all the speakers and attendees and everyone who's been involved in this. So thanks everyone for being part of this, being dialed in and volunteering your time to speak to us and allow us the opportunity to learn from one another. If you have any questions as we go through, feel free to use the chat box. And those questions will be sent to me and I'll be able to ask them as we go through, and there's also a little bit of time at the end for questions. And we've also got Vikram behind the scenes for tech support if anything goes wrong, so it should all be under control if there's anything that doesn't quite work, but it should be fine. So it's a bit of an introduction to myself. My name is Anna Shaw and I work for RFI Group as a Client Insights Manager. So RFI Group is a global insights provider. So we have surveys across the entire globe. We do research to do with consumer banking and business banking. And recently we've been really looking into COVID-19 and the impacts of COVID-19 on financial stress, on income, on take-up of consumer lending products, looking at really how is the pandemic impacting customers, impacting sentiment towards banks and institutions, and really looking at what do customers need. So this is an area that we've been really deep diving into, and we've also been looking into as well the changing payments behaviours and take up of new products such as buy now, pay later, payday loans, really looking at that changing credit landscape as well. So a whole range of research that we've been looking into to really understand financial inclusion and see, how can our research help better guide institutions to support customers, and also what can we learn about what customers need and what consumers need. So it's a little bit about me, but moving on to the real event for today, I'd like to introduce two people who I've actually been lucky enough to work with throughout this year on a number of articles and some content to do with inclusion. So I've got Mariko Braswell and Vinita Gadinho, who are both experts in this space, and I'll let them introduce themselves, as today they'll be talking us through a really exciting and I see really important partnerships that they've been working together on. So Mariko, I might start with you if that works.
Great. Thank you so much, Anna. And thank you to all the attendees and especially the panelists for joining us today. We are thrilled about this partnership, but first I'm going to tell you a little bit about Move 78 and why this partnership is so important with Financial Resilience Australia. Move 78 is a corporate advisory based on tech companies that are looking to expand to Asia, primarily from the US and the UK. We have our roots firmly in fintech, but we've now brought into greater technology. So we also are divided into two initiatives, more our commercial initiatives, which is more M&A activity and consultancy work and business development, and then also our philanthropic initiatives. And that's where my main focus is. And that's why I'm here today with all of you. We are thrilled to be partnered with Vinita and Financial Resilience Australia. And our partnership is so unique and perfect in that we complement each other with our fintech background and digital inclusion background. And of course, they bring together the banking and financial wellness background. So together we cover a lot of ground, and we're really excited to work together with them. So I'll leave it to you, Vinita.
Thank you everyone, and thanks to the panelists and to all the attendees, in particular to Suthapa, who's woken up at 5:30 in the morning, Indian time, to join us today. So I'd like to acknowledge that we're meeting today on the lands of the Kulin Nation, our Aboriginal elders, and I'd like to pay my respects to their elders past, present, and emerging. So thank you so much for that introduction, Mariko and Anna. As you know, my background is quite eclectic. I've been a banker for more than 20 years. I've done research on money as an academic. I've also helped to create and run a microfinance charity. And this year I started my life as a startup entrepreneur. But a common thread across all of these roles has always been a passion to help people to manage their money so that they improve much of everything that I do. And to me, this week is the most important week because of that. I also think that I've been so lucky sitting here in the middle of COVID thinking, what can I do to make things better? And as luck would have it, I've come across many fantastic partners, particularly Mariko. So we decided to partner to turn our good intentions into practical actions that can make a difference to improve financial well-being. And that's what I hope that this partnership will allow us to do. A little bit later, we'll talk a little bit about what COVID has taught us. Financial inclusion needs to take notice of. And Anna and the panelists will talk about that in a little while.
Perfect. As far as this partnership, I mean, well, actually, I've got just a couple of questions just to get to know really what's going on behind this. And I think probably the first question I'd like to know is, simply put, how do you feel this partnership can help to address financial inclusion? So what actions and what do you think this could do to help address that?
Should I start, or do you want to go,
Yeah.
Denita? I think first and foremost, our aim is to gather people together across sectors and also to raise awareness. I think so often the hot term was digital or financial inclusion, but financial wellness is more broad, and it considers the person and community in a more holistic way and sustainable way. So I'm sure Denita has some to add to that.
Sure. So I'd like to answer this with a slightly long-winded response, so please bear with me. I think that COVID has brought to the fore three things that really impact, from my point of view, how this partnership can make a difference. The first is that it has made it so clear that our physical, mental, and financial health is inextricably linked. And that if we are to look for and holistic so that they can improve physical, mental, and financial health. So to me, that's one of the first things that this partnership needs to look at. What are the linkages between these aspects of health and well-being, and how can we create opportunities to be able to improve them all? The second thing that I think COVID has brought to real reality is that anyone, no matter what their gender, age, or earning capacity, can be impacted by a shock. So I think that we all need to find ways to take practical action to improve and protect our health and well-being in the home and in our workplace. And again, I think that that's something that this partnership can help us to do. Look for ways in which we can protect the health and well-being of individuals in their home environment as well as in their work environment. And the last thing I think that COVID has really driven home is that no one individual or organization or even country can hope to solve this pandemic on their own. So if we are to find a solution, we must all work together. And to me, just this little group that's talking this morning, we've got people from New Zealand, from India, from Singapore, from Sydney and Melbourne joining in, collectively looking for solutions. And to me, that's exactly what I hope that this partnership can achieve in the longer run.
Perfect. That kind of ties in with my next question, actually, which is kind of looking at what are the long-term goals you both have for this partnership? So say over the next, 5 years, what would you really hope to be achieving? I might start with you again, Mariko.
I think we're looking to become a bona fide nonprofit organization itself with membership, that kind of thing. But we would love to have involvement from countries all throughout APAC and across sectors, including government, business, academia, the innovation ecosystems, all on board to make it the most interactive possible. That's my short answer. Denita.
And as usual, I'll give a slightly longer answer. Please bear with me.
No worries.
So my whole life, I think that I've looked at the ways in which we can combine evidence to take action. So I'd really like to see a minimum of 4 different kinds of work streams that this kind of partnership can look at. One is the network. As we mentioned, we must have connections across us all so that we can combine our efforts, reduce waste and duplication, and more importantly, find collective solutions. The second thing that I think we need to be informed by is good research and evidence. So I think that there needs to be an evidence base and a knowledge hub, which gathers together the really fantastic evidence that comes from different countries, which very often we don't have access to. And I'd like to be able to combine that in one place so that we all have access to the best type of evidence. The third thing I'm really passionate about is experimenting. You know, you need to turn that evidence into action and experiment, try, test, and learn from different approaches that can work in different business and organizations. So that experimentation to me is really important. And last but not least, I think that we can really combine strengths in terms of learning and development opportunities, because training and building skills is something we all need, whether it's in the business or government or industry or not-for-profit. So I think in my own mind, these are 4 areas that our partnership can explore.
Perfect. And as far as if anyone wants to get involved and help you both out with this partnership, or, you know, if they have any opportunity that they can add some value, what should people do if they want to, you know, be part of this network and connect with you both?
You could reach out to us via either of our websites, move78.global or Financial Resilience Australia's website as well. We both have pages on there speaking about this network, and we can go from there and continue the discussion.
And I'll just add to that, you know, I'm an inveterate communicator. So I will be reaching out through all of my networks, everyone that I know. I'll be writing on LinkedIn and other types of media. And my call will be anyone who wants to join us can please put their hand out, and we will make our level best to engage you in what we do.
Exactly.
Thank you for talking us through that partnership. I think there's a lot of good things that will come from that, and I'm really looking forward to seeing kind of everything you both achieve with this, and I hope I can help as well with it wherever possible. Was there anything else either of you want to add about the partnership, or shall we introduce the rest of our panel?
I think we should go with our panel, and then we can wrap up at the end of that.
Yep, perfect.
Yes.
Okay, well, thank you both, Mariko and Vanita, for talking us through that. I'd now like to introduce the rest of the panel, who are also experts in this space. So we're very lucky today to have such a qualified panel of really impressive women as well. So we've also got Sutapa Banerjee, who is Board Director, Harvard Fellow and Behavioural Insights Advisor. And we've also got Dr. Pushpa Wood, who is Director of the Financial Education and Research Centre in Massey University in New Zealand. So Sutapa, if you could introduce yourself and tell us about your work and tell us about yourself.
Okay. So I've actually been in the financial services space, you know, through my entire career. So this whole topic of financial well-being sits nicely with me. So I've been a money manager for most of my life, largely across 2 multinational banks. That's what I started with. And then after 24 years, I moved out of the corporate treadmill, and I went back to school, and I did a fellowship at Harvard. And in the last 5 years, I've been sort of working in the whole area of behavioral insights. And, you know, to me, it's fascinating the kind of practical insights it has, not just in the financial services sector, certainly in that sector, but across sectors. I've had a specific input and specific focus in the area of and today I sit on a number of commercial boards as an independent director, also on some nonprofits. So I have a lot of experience in the last almost 6 years in the financial inclusion space, both through an association with SEVA, which is a group which does financial inclusion for micro entrepreneurs and women. And I was, you know, Women's World Banking's nominee director on another board as well, linked to SEVA. Also, I want to sort of talk about commercial entities, which today, you know, with the kind of reforms that are happening in India, are stepping into this area. So, but there's still a lot of siloed mentality of social business, commercial business, academia remains siloed itself. So while Vinita sort of alluded in all of them, I teach a course in India's business school on gender and behavioral insights. So I kind of see people speaking different languages and a cross-sector, multi-stakeholder approach, which kind of brings them together, will help best practices flourish. And that's pretty much what I'm hoping to also get from this alliance. So I'll certainly be one reaching out. I've already started talking to Vinita about a couple of initiatives. And to me, the whole idea of not assuming that you already know, even if you've been in a sector for very long, the ability to be able to use those insights and learn from those insights is what I think would be really useful.
Perfect, thank you for that. And I might hand over to you now to introduce yourself as well.
Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa, and namaste. And I'm speaking from the land of Tiarawa Māori tribe, which is based in Wellington. So I acknowledge their heritage and my heritage from India. I have very different background to all of you. I have never had anything to do with banks in my life in terms of working. Yes, I have very much dealings with them all my life, but never worked in banking sector. I'm not an economist and I'm not an accountant. All right. So I come from a very strong education and community education background. And back home in India, I worked in literacy and numeracy area as well as national service scheme. So I've been involved, and I'm a kind of a third generation unionist. So my work has always been following my dad from very young age, attending all the union meetings and sort of raising voices about what we can do for people. And literacy, numeracy, and managing money was one of the key things that I got involved in from a very young age. My education or academic background has got nothing to do with my job. I specialize in Indian religions and especially role of women in religion. But my professional background has always been, since I've been in New Zealand, is in education sector, especially in tertiary and community education sector. So I have worked right across NGO sector, community sector, the tribal areas, private sector and government sector. So currently I head the center, which is a Center for Financial Education and Research. It's quite a unique center in the world in some ways. There is no other university has a center like this, which has got kind of everything under one roof, if I can use the terminology. So it has research and evaluation arm, it has education and resource development arm, and it has got then consultancy and developing targeted resources for other organizations. So we work right across different groups. Sometimes one of the unique pieces of work in our research is a longitudinal study, which is 20-year longitudinal study started in 2012. It is only the second one in the world. The first one was University of Arizona. So we followed their pattern quite closely. And we're going to follow these 300 young people. Well, they won't be young by the time we finish the study, but they started at the age of 18 to 24. And we wanted to, I guess through this study, we want to track them and see what their financial knowledge, understanding and behavior looks like as they go through different stages of their life. What is their thinking about their future? What steps are they taking? We also wanted to understand where did actually, if any education they had, where did it come from? And it was very interesting to note that in 2012 and in 2017, the parents still remain to be the first port of call when it comes to financial advice or asking those questions. And that has always kept me, I guess, quite active in nagging at different groups and organizations who are offering financial education programs, is to actually try and convince them that financial education does not happen in isolation. It does not happen in one after the other. It has to happen simultaneously from all fronts. So it needs to happen in school, at home, at workplace, at university, at all fronts at the same time. All right, and that has been quite an interesting journey and last about 8 to 10 years. So my passion always has been what actually triggers people to change their behavior. What is where can I draw a line and then say, right, if I draw this line, people will cross over and do this. So I'm always keen on, so what? So I always ask the question, even after the research paper comes out, I usually say, so what? And my frustration has been that the commercial sector has always been interested in reach rather than impact. And with some of my counterparts in India, I always have had interesting discussions with them to say, okay, so you're getting children to sit exams in the school, so what? Right? Yes, they are financially literate, but what happens after that? So that's from me for now.
Perfect. I think that'd be interesting. An interesting question for later to talk about, financial literacy across different age groups and also across the different markets. I think we've got quite a good representation in this panel, like you mentioned, from different countries. So I'd be it's on my list, something to ask a little bit later. But thinking about the fact that we're all in different countries, I'd love to start off with a question, which is just looking at, given the current climate of COVID-19, it was very unexpected and it's had a lot of impacts across a range of different areas, and financial inclusion and financial stress is part of that. I'd love to know from each of you how the respective countries, so where you live, how that country is coping with COVID, and what are some of the flow-on consequences and impacts you've started to see. So I might start from the top of my screen, which is Mariko, if you want to start us off with what you're seeing in Singapore. Yeah.
The Singapore government here has been amazingly supportive and helpful across sectors, actually, providing relief for different workers, and also the fintech ecosystems. There's lots of initiatives to give relief to startups and promote help them out as far as hiring and that kind of thing. So there's been a lot of help from the government here. But COVID did kind of lay bare the issue with migrant workers and remittances, which we'll be talking more about on Friday. So that was an issue that kind of came up and kind of sullied the Singapore's reputation slightly, but then they recovered and they've been treating it and dealing with it head on. So it's been interesting to see, and I feel fortunate to be here because they've been so proactive in how they're trying to help the communities here.
Yep, so interesting to see as well. I think that other session, I believe that's on Friday, it's going to be quite interesting to find out more. And be nice about that as well. It's a big issue, it's really coming to light.
Yeah, and it was a little unfortunate. I mean, the remittance problem is a global issue. It's not just in Singapore, but because Singapore was doing so well with their reaction to COVID-19, when that came to light, people seemed to focus on that right away. But they're working on it and moving forward with it. And I do think the whole digibank license announcements later in the year, that will all be helping to address it as well, I'm sure. So
yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that.
Sure.
Benita, I might go to you next.
Sure. So like Mariko, I think the Australian government jumped in quite quickly once we had COVID to look at providing first physical support in terms of what we need to do to protect ourselves from the infection. then starting to look at the mental health aspects, as I spoke about, because the more you're isolated, the more people are forced to be on their own and not have social connections, the mental issues are starting to come to the fore, people losing their jobs or having reduced hours. So financial support is also being provided. But I'm very conscious that no matter how much support is being provided, it is temporary. So it has a fixed date and there is a time when it'll stop. So my concern is always, how can we equip people so that they themselves become more resilient to the shocks? So my focus very much is on the groups who have been most impacted. And these groups are women, young people, and those who are already on low incomes or already having very low safety nets in place. And unfortunately, almost 50% of households, even before COVID emerged, already had very little safety net in terms of savings. Right. Also, I think our recovery is being positioned as a jobs-led recovery. But if so, I think that employers and workplaces need to find ways to improve the financial health and well-being of their workplace. And again, that's an area that I'm really concerned with, to find practical solutions so that the employers actually know what they can do to, one, measure what's happening in their workplace, and then two, take action to address that. So these were the main things that came out, which I highlighted, just the fact that it's not just a physical issue. There is a mental issue attached to it, and there's a financial aspect as well, and they all need to be looked at. So I'll be...
Thanks for that. Yeah, I think something, I'm based in Sydney as well, and some of our research is showing that we've seen, we've estimated around 11 million Australians could be impacted, have their income impacted negatively by COVID, and it's particularly young people or those in casual employment or contract employment. So with that jobs first approach, I think it's an interesting area to keep an eye on, particularly as the support starts to, step back. There's going to be these ongoing consequences and those ongoing struggles. For that. Chapra, I might go to you next.
Yeah, so, I'd like to start by saying that India is a developing country, and it has, in any case, it's a complex country. It's a very diverse, it's a very heterogeneous country. And there were a lot of issues earlier. What COVID pretty much did is it kind of threw a lot of the problems into sharper relief for us to view them, as it were, and obviously exacerbated some of the issues that were already there. And India really is multiple Indias, right? I mean, there's a rural-urban divide, which is very stark. There is a formal, informal sector, and to sort of define it for everybody, the informal sector are really mom and pop shops. These are unincorporated enterprises, and they employ less than 10 people and have no retirement or other benefits. So it's literally, you're almost sort of coming on contract and working. They don't fall under any kind of regulatory guidelines at all. And to just share, India today has close to about 93% working in that informal sector. It's a staggering statistic. So all of us, me and most of the people sort of I talk to or work with fall into the formal sector. We interact with the informal sector. Sometimes we do initiatives for the informal sector, sometimes, but these are the people who are supplying food as we stay locked down. These are the people, who actually are the people who are sometimes employed by larger entities, but sometimes they're taken on contract because of a multiplicity of complex rules. So let me talk about just 2 or 3 points which got thrown into sharp relief in the Indian context. I mean, there's no point talking about what the government could have done or did not do, but some of the points, or for that matter, what businesses did or did not do, because pretty much everybody did a lot of things. Communities worked, and which is why in one of the largest slums across the world, the Dharavi, which is not very far away from where I live, it is actually a case study of how in a really densely populated place, COVID could actually be restricted. And it's been talked about worldwide. So obviously, people pulled out all stops, whether it's NGOs, whether it's businesses, whether it's government, but there still remains a lot to be done. But let me talk about a few things which, as I said, got thrown out into sharp relief. One is migrant labor. And that's something I think it's covered in the Financial Inclusion Week on one of the days. I don't remember when. But the sheer size of that population and what happens when you have a lockdown in that population, and what happens when most of them work in cities, in construction sites, what happens, and these are all densely populated, what happens when you stop doing that work. So migrant labor is, again, data is not very easy to get, but cross-validating, it's roughly about 120 million in a 1.3 billion population. So it's sizable, right? So the point I'm trying to bring is the solutions, or even the attempted solutions, have to be very contextual, not just for India, but for all of these minor mini Indias. And COVID affected everybody from the top to the bottom. Some have a nest egg and have better resilience, and some don't, right? So some of the things which need to be done is, if I look at the informal sector, or the 93%, right? There, again, there is a divide between rural and urban. That is where really a lot of the focus of the government in terms of direct bank transfers, etc., have happened. But that is where we need to build financial resilience in a way, and look at a lot of evidence-based research to actually build that, which may or may not have happened in exactly the way it ought to have. Today, there are a number of people in the financial landscape reaching out to different people, just like you have microfinance reaching out to one level. I sit on the board of a fintech company which is reaching out to MSMEs. These are micro and small medium enterprises. And when I say that 93% work in the informal sector, these are the business that we're really talking about. And yet, banks and even the larger non-bank finance companies don't lend to them. So there's obviously an economic benefit to lending to them. And today, capital markets in India and even globally are paying a premium to businesses at the bottom of the pyramid. So that, to me, is extremely interesting. We have a goods and services tax, without getting into the details, that has started to formalize this informal sector. And that's, again, interesting because, it brings them into the safety net of a lot of benefits which others may not have earlier had. So that's one part. So that's one part, which is financial inclusion. And to reach the last mile, because India is such a large country, reach and distribution is extremely important. And what's happening today is using Aadhaar, which is really a card that out of 1.3 billion, 90% of India has. And that, I'm a huge supporter of Aadhaar because it creates a unified digital infrastructure for the country. And through that, today, people can actually start to transact even in the mom and pop shops. So you're able to do basic financial transactions like taking out money, do remittances through that. Now that needs to cover the whole spectrum of the country, which is obviously not happened. So that's one part of financial inclusion, which is very critical, because if I take the example of the migrant labor, how does that person who's sitting in the cities, and they've now started migrating back to the cities, how will the person remit back home? Right? You need something. Today, 40% to 60% of that happens through high-risk informal channels. So somebody's carrying cash back, right? So that's one part where any best practices across the world can actually be taken from India, because some phenomenal work has done just using an Aadhaar card where you can do a variety of transactions. Then comes the lending to that MSME sector, making that grow, where there is a lot of work of leveraging technology, just using technology to be able to create credit history where none existed because nobody is lent to them. So you're using surrogates. So that's another interesting space that's happening. Then we come to the microfinance area, which I alluded to earlier, where a lot of organizations are working, and particularly with women. And I want to stress that gender and the whole area of intelligent design and behavioral insights cut across both the formal and the informal sector. So microfinance is the other area where a lot of help is necessary if we could sort of look at best practices, both within India, to be able to translate them, and to be able to take evidence-based research from outside and then contextualize it, experiment, and see what works best, rather than continuing to do what we were doing. And it again requires a multiple stakeholder approach of bringing everybody together. And quickly, to just stress, the formal sector needs it as well. There are startups which have gone bust during this period, right? So what do you do there? And, I've been a money manager most of my life. So, young people, I think Vinita spoke about the power of compounding, the ability to save early. And there are so many behavioral insights. We've had Richard Thaler talk about, save more tomorrow. So you take away the present bias, you take away, you take into account that we all have an instant gratification mode that we operate in, where we don't like to sacrifice what we get today. But as your income increases, can you automatically start to save more, right? In the US, that moved from 49% to 86% in 1 year. So you automate it. The default mode is that you will have a certain percentage of your salary going out, which increases as your salaries go up. So all of these have interesting applications in both the formal sector and the informal sector. Last year's Nobel winner, Abhijit Banerjee, did an experiment in Calcutta, and I'll end with that, where what he did was, there was enormous amount of messaging happening during the COVID period. He took West Bengal, where, being a Bengali, he's obviously a revered figure. I might mention he actually happens to be my brother-in-law as well, if you notice that surname Banerjee. Anyway, so he did an experiment with 25 million people, where he sent a video which came as part of a link in their phones. And he did, of course, a control, and one with the video and one without, and where he sent a message out, very simple messages of washing your hands, of reporting if you have symptoms to the village elder. And there was the difference was stark. It was a 46 or a 50% increase. So statistically, huge differences. Again, what that shows is, in spite of being bombarded with messages, the moment you have somebody who is looked up to and respected sends a message that cuts through the clutter and makes people react more. Now, to doing things in an intelligent way, intelligent design can play a significant role in what you want to achieve. And I think that's really the need of the hour. So two things: getting away from silos and working together, government, businesses, non-government organizations. And that sometimes does not happen in India, because each second insight and using intelligent design to actually be able to do something smarter. So I'd stop there.
Thank you for that. There's so many questions I could ask just after that, but I'll find for a little bit later. But thank you so much for that. Pushpa, if you'd like to talk about how things are in New Zealand.
And adding to everything what especially what Vinita said is applied, was quite interesting for a lot of us who have been in the financial education, financial capability, and all of that different terminology we are using nowadays. Have been involved in that. One thing was really quite interesting, that despite the fact the country has been putting millions and millions and millions of dollars each year and lifting people's financial capability and financial well-being, obviously hasn't gone into the right places. Right. And the reason why I say that is that within the second week of lockdown, people were starting to cry out that we don't have sufficient money to buy groceries for next week. Right. So when you start to see within the second or third week of lockdown, people are struggling to make ends meet, that's where it really keeps me awake. Right. And that's where we did a kind of a very short piece of paper where we say the new and emerging phases of vulnerability post-COVID-19. So we looked at there are traditionally what I would call a vulnerable people who have been vulnerable, have been traditionally in our New Zealand's benefit system. Right. So for them, things didn't change very much, except the isolation. Right. So their income level did not go down. If anything, their income level actually went up slightly, because the benefits were increased for them to meet up. But then there was a sector which was supposedly doing okay. Right. And they were the ones who were new emerging sector, became very quickly emerging group who were running the risk of falling off the wall and joining the vulnerable groups. Right. And then we had women who were there's a particular group of women who already have been in that vulnerability stats, but there was a new group of women who were also joining that. So that was quite an interesting web. And then, of course, we had the whole SME sector, which was sort of doing okay or just doing okay. But then all of a sudden, COVID hit, and there was a huge challenges in front of them. So we had actually 3 key sectors that were really hugely impacted by COVID. One was our education sector, and like Australia and New Zealand, especially such a small country, we heavily rely, our universities heavily rely on international students. Now that income pipeline was kind of almost came to a halt. So the 2-3 universities who were quite active, and Massey was one of them, because we have a huge distance learning program. So for us, the impact was comparatively smaller as opposed to other 7 universities, because we could still link up with our students internationally. So that sector has had and they are still measuring the impact of that income loss, right? And that is going to hit them next year, right? Because this year the budget was set, the money was there, income was there. It is going to have a huge impact when you will not have new enrollments, or you will not have second year, third year enrollments, right? So universities have been putting a huge pressure on government to find a way for them to actually bring in students. And only 2 days ago, the government has announced they've just given permission for 250 research students, international research students, masters and PhD, whose research relies on being present in New Zealand to actually come and enter the country with restrictions, of course. Our second sector, which has been hugely impacted, that is tourism. And related to tourism is, of course, the service sector. And that's where we had majority of our low education level people involved. Right, that's where the low income people were involved, and that's where quite a lot of our what we call the seasonal workforce was involved. So you will be surprised to know that at the moment, on one hand, we're saying there are job losses and people are unemployed. On the other hand, our fruit sector, fruit picking sector, for example, is crying out for fruit pickers. We don't have workforce to actually come and pick the fruits for us, because we heavily relied on seasonal workforce from Pacific Islands. They're not there, and that is causing a huge challenge. In terms of what our government is doing, they have put considerable amount of money, and I mean literally billions of dollars, into, in New Zealand it is known as shovel-ready projects, and that's the infrastructure, building roads, building buildings. And some of us have been raising quite loud noises to say, but this particular sector is 90%, if not more, is dominated by males. Where is some investment for female dominated sector? Where is some investment for service sector, the old age homes, the retirement villages, the hospitals, all of those kind of things? So there's that discussion is still going on as what we can do. What COVID has highlighted that even the people with, in our terms, 150, 200K, which is kind of a quite decent amount per year to live on, are struggling. Now, that is the group which does not necessarily require financial help. And if I use my crude terminology, they require a jolly good kick on their backside. Is basically to actually get their act together and start to look at how to manage their money better. So if I look at that, we recently, actually, our Commission for Financial Capability did a research during the lockdown period. And they came up with the figures, 38% of people at that time, this was in April, were struggling to make ends meet. right? So they were really struggling to make ends meet. And then there were further 40% of people who were actually, if not given any help, or if they did not do something, really did not change something, they were running the risk of falling into that, right? So when you start to look at that startling figure, so a country of 5 million, it starts to really impact, right? In terms of financial inclusion, we have enjoyed as a nation a status of one of the most banked country in OECD, right? Because of a benefit system. You have to be banked. You have to have a bank account to do that. There are exceptions, of course, the prisoners, and there's another piece of work going on about it within the inclusion sector. Right, so that has been a quite interesting, startling revelation for a lot of people. Though we feel we are financially included, but lockdown has actually highlighted the digital divide that exists. Right? So despite the fact that you do have a bank account, if you cannot access it in periods like this, or if you cannot really gain information that you need to, then we have a risk. And so that digital divide was in rural, urban, like anywhere else, the generation, and then of course the Maori and Pacific communities, right? Which is our indigenous Maoris, our indigenous communities. So that piece of work is now being kind of picked up, so much so that the strategically we are now looking at how do we actually make everybody in this country have a digital access to financial products and services, right? Now, as soon as you do that, then there's another question comes with that is, how do we actually equip them to be knowledgeable, experienced, and have confidence to deal with financial products and services in a digital world, right? When you're used to a face-to-face, right? And the third group, which is of concern, is our retirees group. So you may or may not know, we have a universal pension system. So once you are 65, you have access to what we call the government superannuation, which is not means tested. Now that is roughly, people say, is between 60 to 70% of your average income. That essentially means there is still a gap for you to actually live comfortably in your retirement. And most of the retirees rely on their savings, and we have a Kiwi Saver scheme, and we have people's private investments, right? So when your interest rate is going considerably low, that is going to, again, that impact is going to hit us in 2022 more so than anywhere, anytime soon, right? Because people, that the retirees still have that buffer to survive from 6 to 9 months in terms of their savings. But when that regular income they have counted on subsidizing their super, we're going to have some challenges. And lastly, the newest phenomena which is happening in New Zealand, and I'm not sure anywhere else, we have been struggling with homelessness. We have been struggling with the low home ownership rate. We have a serious love affair with home ownership in our country. And so now, today, actually, I heard that one of the banks have even announced below 2% mortgage rate, right? So mortgage interest rate has today gone down below 2%. So therefore, what is actually happening, and people are seriously concerned about, is that we need to find a way to minimize the impact of that, because the speculators and the people with money are going in all out to purchase houses. And so house prices, instead of going down in New Zealand, they're going up, and they're going up on a kind of a daily basis, not monthly basis. And in some areas, it's almost impossible for average income person to actually purchase it. So there are some challenges for us. Government has done considerable amount of work they have put, but majority of the work and majority of the money that is going, it is still, in my personal view, it is still in meeting the emergency needs. So it is still in the response mode rather than recovery and regeneration mode. We still need to move out of response and move into recovery and regeneration. So in my view, I think what we need to be looking at is, where do we need to put just-in-time support, right? So we can prevent people from falling into the deeper. Where is temporary support is needed with time limit, and whereas long-term support is needed without time limit, but with outcome focused. I'll stop here.
No, thanks for that. That was definitely really interesting. And I think one of the areas you touched on was this gender issue where females or women are more likely to be impacted by financial inclusion. And we've got a question from the audience, which is asking, what can be done to help financial inclusion for women across the globe? So I know both for you, Pushpa and Sutapa, you both are quite invested in these gender issues. And I'd love to hear a little bit about maybe what work you've been doing in this space and what you're seeing in your countries, as well as far as the work being done or the work that needs to be done to actually help address financial inclusion objectives for women specifically. Sutapa, maybe I could start with you.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, so, gender in the Indian context is something which, while again, as I said, different people are doing different things, it needs to come center stage, and that hasn't yet come center stage. In the area of education, most people tend to look at economic participation as following from education. And in education, actually, if you look at the number of men and women graduates, women actually outnumber men. And when it comes to postgrads, they are on the verge of outnumbering men. But that has not translated into economic participation. And that's a paradox, and I've written about this. And that paradox really comes from cultural norms. And that's an area that needs to be actually investigated, and work needs to be done. To actually to give you a perspective, in the Gender Economic Participation Index, India ranks just above Saudi Arabia and Pakistan. So that really should be setting alarm bells ringing. So you have less than 27% women who work, in the combined formal and informal sector. And the reasons vary across different sectors. And, to me, a lot of the kind of typical clerical jobs, etc., that typically aspiring middle classes or middle classes wanted to work for, or even among the poorer sections, are not going to be there. They've already, many of them are disappearing, have disappeared, and they will continue to disappear. So the whole area of micro entrepreneurship, and what you can do there, that's one very important area which there is focus on that area. And again, women in that area are typically, and that's where some of the organizations that I'm associated with, the Seva Group, etc., trying to help, and that needs to be helped more and more. So that's an area which I think is an important area to look at, and I think women are making their mark there. The second, if I come back into the formal sector, even among the higher earning classes, you see there's an occupational bias. Women tend to come into some jobs and not into the more powerful decisive roles. And that's something which is across the board. But it typically, again, comes from a gender stereotype, right? That decisive roles can be taken on by broad shoulders, while the more nurturing roles like nurses, primary school teachers can be taken on by women, which is, again, completely and totally biologically untrue. So the whole area of deliberately breaking stereotypes, which means don't let the woman make pickle and uniforms at home, even if you're giving them employment, even through a corporate social responsibility program, make them carpenters, make them drivers, make them do what they don't do. And similarly, also encourage counter stereotypical images. So this is something which I do a lot of work on. In fact, my course in IIM Ahmedabad is actually called a gender lens on corporate policy. So where you look at that lens to see, are you catering to that constituency which ought to be 50%? And if you're and there must be reasons why, even if you think you are, you're not doing it because they're not coming up to that level. So the formal sector and the informal sector are completely different. There are overt biases in the informal sector which are not there in the formal sector. So we all sort of go with the belief that it's zero discrimination, but no discrimination does not bring in neutrality. And affirmative action itself sometimes can have a backlash. So it's a very judicious mix again of legislation, incentives, and behavioral insights which may move the needle in certain directions. You can actually even turn a cultural norm on its head within a certain context if you again use the right research, and there are many examples in that area. So I think gender kind of cuts across the whole spectrum, and I think even in the COVID scenario where most of us have had to work from home, I am actually optimistic that with both the gig economy now expanding and work from home and work from anywhere being a par for the course, I actually think that that would benefit women in terms of giving them the kind of flexibility, even in the short and medium term, to be able to cope better and to be able to work rather than not work. I know there is a reverse argument that a lot of the elderly care, a lot of the care for children who are also locked down are coming on to them. But at least, and here I'm going segment by segment, at least in the upper middle class and this is more anecdotal rather than empirical evidence, and I'm sort of careful when I'm sort of specifying that it's anecdotal rather than empirical evidence, a lot of people in that upper middle and more segment, a lot of the men, because they're working from home, contribute to domestic work. So some kind of equalization on the home front enables a woman to actually work. But that's of course specific to that segment. But as I said, gender cuts across the entire spectrum, and you need to bring gender front and center within the country to be able to really move the needle. So far, it has been ease of doing business and other priorities. I think just bringing women front and center will have many other side benefits, and multiplier effects, some of which we already know, and many more in countries like India. I'll stop there.
I'm conscious of the time, so I'll just add a few more things to what has already been said. I think from my point of view, 2-3 things. Number one thing is the women themselves have to realize their own potential and their own power. In my experience, whether it's anecdotal or lived experience, women are the ones who limit themselves and other women around them when it comes to the potential. And we need to really take that out of equation. Number two, I think we need to start changing our language. We need to start talking about financial capability for all, irrespective of gender, right? Because as soon as we start dividing in gender, it starts to have a slightly different connotation and provides excuses to people. I'm all for taking any excuse out. Number three, we need to really keep pushing, and in New Zealand we're doing that, is living wage and pay parity. That needs to come in right across the country. We need to introduce living wage and we need to introduce pay parity. I was quite pleased. I think it was Spain today announced that it will be illegal from today for women to get paid less if they were doing the same job as men. I'm sure it, but I'm sure it was Spain, but could be somebody else. The next fourth thing we need to happen is that women need to be at the decision-making table at every level. All right, and that is very, very important to happen, and that's what we need to be pushing for. On top of that, and do a real good critique of it and give it back to government to say, this is how you are indirectly discriminating. All right, this is how you're indirectly shutting women out. I'll stop here. I'm conscious of time.
Thanks so much for that. I think from both of you especially, that was really interesting to hear, and I think it's been really great to have that global perspective as well. And I think as a panel of women, it was a question that just was worth asking, so I'm glad we got a little bit of time to cover that one. Now it is a little over 12 o'clock. So I might finish up here unless anyone has any final comments they'd like to say.
No.
On
Well,
behalf
thank you
of the
very much.
partners, I'd just like to thank the panelists, thank Anna. You've done a fantastic job. I'd like to invite everyone to come in tomorrow as well. We're having a fantastic panel on financial fintech and the role of inclusive design. And on Friday, we're talking about remittances and migrant workers. And look, this was only the start of the conversation. I know as women, we've got so much to say. All I'm saying is don't worry. Definitely be having many follow-up opportunities, and we'll be reaching out on behalf of Mariko and myself to all of you to celebrate the fantastic difference we can all make by working together.
And thank you from me. It was nice to meet some new people.
Very nice meeting you as well.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Pleasure
everyone,
from my
for dialing
side as
in.
well.
Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you all.